On the broadcast tonight, no suspect can investigate its own crime is South Korea's answer to North Korea's proposal to jointly look into Seoul's conclusion that Pyongyang sent spy drones to the south. The Korean government unveils measures to tackle the soaring youth unemployment problem with an eye on creating 500,000 jobs by 2017. And powerless to halt seizures by pro-Russian mobs, Ukraine urges UN to send in peacekeepers. Early edition at 6 begins now.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in New York, 7 p.m. in Canberra, and 6 on a Tuesday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gonyo.
And I'm Daniel Choi. Thank you for joining us.
We begin this Tuesday evening with North Korea's bizarre offer to help Seoul investigate the suspected North Korean drones that recently crashed into South Korean territory.
Right, thanks, but no thanks, right? Pyongyang denies having anything to do with the 3 unmanned aerial aircraft, but South Korea says it would be absurd to give the prime and only real suspect a role within the investigation. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea has rejected North Korea's demand to conduct a joint investigation into the drones that crashed on South Korean soil late last month. An official at South Korea's presidential office said Tuesday that there could never be a case where the prime suspect was allowed to investigate evidence into his own crime. He added the South is conducting a thorough and scientific investigation to collect more evidence to prove North Korea sent the drones. South Korea's defense ministry called North Korea's offer a low-grade tactic of psychological warfare. Seoul says it was spied on by the 3 drones, one of which flew over the presidential office. North Korea denied responsibility Monday, accusing the South of fabricating the latest case. The North's powerful National Defense Commission then proposed to jointly investigate all cases that Seoul blames Pyongyang for, including the Cheonan incident, the 2010 torpedo attack on a South Korean warship that killed 46 South Korean sailors. South Korea has held the North responsible following an international probe, but the North denies its involvement. The commission asked South Korea's top presidential security advisor, Kim Jang-soo, to lead the South Korean team in the joint investigation. South Korea's defense ministry released an interim report on its investigation last Friday, presenting additional evidence like engine capacities, fuel tank sizes, flight hours, and designs that further point to Pyongyang as the perpetrator. The first suspected North Korean drone was discovered on March 24th in Paju, north of Seoul and close to the inter-Korean border. The second a week later near a maritime border between the 2 Koreas, and the third on Sunday about 300 kilometers east of Seoul. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The long-delayed South Korea-U.S. defense cost-sharing pact has passed the first hurdle at Seoul's National Assembly. The Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee gave the green light to Seoul and Washington's renewed special measure agreement on sharing the cost of stationing 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea.
The lawmakers agreed that South Korea will pay some $880 million annually from this year through 2018, a 5.8% increase from last year. The pact's approval had been delayed, which sparked concerns that South Korean employees of U.S. Forces Korea would be forced to take unpaid leave and that affiliated firms would have to suspend operations. The bill will now be put up for a vote at a plenary session on Wednesday.
So it is now official. U.S. President Barack Obama will visit Korea on April 25th and 26th. The presidential office in Seoul says Presidents Park and Obama are expected to discuss ways to develop their strategic alliance as well as how to cooperate more closely on North Korea's nuclear issue.
South Korean media is also reporting that the U.S. president will likely arrive in Seoul along with a set of Korea's 9 lost royal seals from the late 19th century. The artifacts, considered national treasures, are thought to have been looted by U.S. troops during the Korean War. Obama's upcoming Asia tour, which also includes stops in Japan, the Philippines, and Malaysia, have garnered a lot of attention as it comes amid strained ties between Seoul and Tokyo over historical differences.
Meanwhile, Korea and Japan will hold their first working-level talks on the so-called comfort women issue in Seoul on Wednesday. Now, at the upcoming talks, Korea is expected to reiterate its demand for an official apology and legal compensation from the Japanese government for its wartime sexual slavery of Korean women.
Japan claims the issue was resolved through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties. Wednesday's meeting is the result of an agreement reached ahead of a trilateral summit in The Hague between South Korea, Japan, and the United States last month. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese army in comfort stations in the early 20th century.
And now on to the ongoing diplomatic efforts to resume the stalled six-party talks aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
China's top nuclear envoy is now in New York City to meet with the U.S. point man on North Korea following his meetings last week with Seoul and Pyongyang's top nuclear officials. Arirang has more.
The top nuclear envoys of China and the United States met for over 3 hours on Monday for the first of their 3 scheduled meetings. While the two did not answer any questions following the meeting, diplomatic sources in New York say the two discussed ways to stop Pyongyang from carrying out additional nuclear tests. Ever since North Korea threatened last month to carry out a new form of nuclear test, tensions have been running high in Northeast Asia. Chinese nuclear envoy Ura Wei and his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies are to meet again in New York on Tuesday and again in Washington on Thursday, during which Wu is expected to debrief Davies about his visit to the North Korean capital last month. Based on Pyongyang's stance, they are to discuss ways to resume the six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. The six-way talks, which involve the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, have been stalled since 2008. The bilateral meeting between China and the U.S. is the latest in a flurry of diplomatic activities in recent days. Prior to his visit to New York, Wu met with his South Korean counterpart to discuss similar issues. There, diplomatic sources in Beijing say he requested South Korea refrain from holding joint military drills with the United States, saying the drills are a stumbling block towards resuming the six-party talks. South Korean envoy Hwang Jung-guk reportedly said that such a move would not be considered as the exercises are purely defensive in nature. Yurian, Arirang News.
So we are seeing a flurry of diplomatic activities over resuming the long-stalled six-party denuclearization talks in North Korea. Of course, Chinese Chief Nuclear Envoy Ura Wei's visit to the U.S. is part of those efforts.
And for an in-depth look into what is going on and what we can expect in the coming months regarding North Korea and the possibility of a resumption of six-nation talks, we have live in the studio Dr. Kim Cheol-woo, Senior Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis.
Dr. Kim, welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
Now, the U.S. and Chinese nuclear envoys meeting in Washington on this Monday, and they are to meet again throughout the week. It comes in the heels of a Seoul-Beijing nuclear envoys meeting and a South Korea, U.S. and Japan trilateral talks last week. So what can we make out of this back-to-back meetings? I mean, what do you think was discussed during these talks?
With the backdrop of the Security Summit in The Hague in last month, in the flurry of diplomatic shuttling activities, the nuclear envoys are trying to draw specific measures and to how to make a flexible preconditions to bring back Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. It used to be China's stance very rigid, because their first ever, the principle was how to start the, six-party talks without preconditions. But at this Florida activists, they would like to brief and debrief all the happenings around from the Pyongyang and Beijing and trilateral talks, all the talks, and finally China and United States get together to discuss and implement the final, details.
Well, there's been rising speculation on the fact that Wu Dawei might actually, for the fact that he's in Washington this time, he could actually have a trilateral talk between envoys of U.S., China, and North Korea, whether it's behind closed door or an open one. What are your thoughts on that?
Interestingly, I'd like to describe Wu Dawei as from the chairman to the mediator, negotiating man at this juncture, particularly. The United States stands on, concrete steps or the credible preliminary actions by the North should be negotiated with the Wu Dawei's mediating technique. Particularly, I think China would try to set up the so-called trilateral talks among Pyongyang, Beijing, and Washington in a closed setting and narrow the gaps between those preconditions stuffs. So Wu Dawei can make a sense of urgency among that sphere.
So outlook is very positive, but behind closed doors, probably.
Yes, indeed.
Now, so should the six-party denuclearization talks resume, in that case, let's say that it does happen, what is a realistic expectation of the negotiations? I mean, will North Korea eventually give up its nuclear arms?
Well, it's very hard to predict and negotiate that. But the thing is, those concerned parties to find a workable middle ground on how to prevent additional nuclear tests. And then with the Chinese initiative, they try to move on the six-party talks, and during that process, they will make additional advice or pressure and anything that possible to make the North Korea, particularly Kim Jong-un regime, make a right choice. It's a long way to go, but at this juncture, North Korea is enjoying the annual spring ritual, like making rhetorical blackmailing and all the escalating military tensions in the peninsula. It's almost the end of that season. So with the new spring and the new setting, they'd like to set up a new tone in prevent from North Korea's additional nuclear tests.
Well, after 3 nuclear tests, the 4th one, the international community will not stand for it. Korea and its allies have really made a lot of strong statements against North Korea, warning them of some grave consequences. But how likely is it that Pyongyang will, I guess, react to these responses from Korea and its allies? Will it carry out a 4th nuclear?
International community should be very careful to push Pyongyang, particularly Kim Jong-un regime at this juncture, too hard to the corner. They have no breathing room. So I think the misjudgment by the Kim Jong-un is very critical. So I think instead of pointing out the unimaginable cost by the North Korea, and we have to be more flexible in dealing with the North Korea's isolated country of North Korea, particularly Park Geun-hye's Dresden Declaration is quite a realistic approach to give them some leverage to think about the right choice. And I think the international community, yes, emotionally it's very clear to send a clear message to North Korea, but we should be more flexible in dealing with, at this juncture particularly, with the threatening by the North Korea.
Right, it's a young leadership, and they painted themselves to a very tight corner.
Particularly,
and we don't want to push them harder.
China's pressure is very valuable because North Korea might worry about what if the China's anger will make a big aftermath right after the nuclear test. So Wu Dawei will likely to explain and persuade the United States side, if you don't help me at this moment, we have no leverage at all to push North Korea back to the negotiating table.
So we do expect a significant role by China in bringing back North Korea to the negotiations table. You briefly mentioned the Dresden speech by President Park Geun-hye, which North Korea flat out rejected.
Yes, indeed.
Now, so with knowing that North Korea is not on for the ride with South Korea, in terms of that, how do we approach North Korea in terms of unification process?
I don't expect diplomatic breakthrough like the Iran deal anytime soon. But President Park Geun-hye's approach to North Korea, I think the international community should collaborate in pushing North Korea to the right path. At the moment, the six-party talks might be back on the horizon. So the thing is here is that North Koreans is deeply in big trouble in economic isolation. So North Korea wants to hold these additional nuclear tests as a last resort card to get back to the negotiating table and using the sly fox technique to get the aid from the international community. But the United States South Korea Trilateral Cooperation made clear, sent a clear message to North Korea. There is no more talks for the sake of talks. So at this moment, UDA's visit to the New York and Washington is very symbolic and significant in terms of how can we not influence to persuade each other's perspectives, narrow down the gaps to move ahead for the denuclearization of North Korea.
Well, Dr. Kim Chul, thank you for coming and highlighting what needs to be focused by us and the world at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gonyong and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
President Park Geun-hye has apologized to the nation for the state intelligence agency's fabrication of evidence in a North Korean spy scandal. Park Ji-won tells us more.
At a cabinet meeting Tuesday, President Park expressed regret over the National Intelligence Service's lax oversight that allowed NIS officials to use forged evidence in a recent North Korean spy scandal.
유감스럽게도 국정원의 잘못된 관행과 철저하지 못한 관리 체계의 허점이 드러나서 국민들께 심려를 끼쳐드리게 되어 송구스럽게 생각합니다.
Calling on the spy agency to revamp itself completely, President Park then said if the NIS loses the public's trust once again, she will make sure those responsible pay the price. NIS Chief Nam Jae-jun also apologized earlier Tuesday morning, promising all-out reforms to root out corrupt practices within the agency.
The agency will overhaul its investigation practices and will push ahead reforms with excruciating effort to root out all wrong practices of the past so this type of incident never happens again.
The apology followed the prosecution's announcement on Monday that 2 documents submitted in the recent North Korean espionage case were fabricated by the intelligence agency. 2 additional intelligence agents were charged with forging border-crossing documents that were used against a former Seoul City employee who was accused of spying for North Korea. The 34-year-old former city employee defected from the North in 2004 and was charged with espionage early last year. He was acquitted of the spy charge against him last August, but prosecutors appealed the case. The forged documents were submitted during the trial. Prosecutors are demanding 7 years in prison for the former city employee. However, a final verdict on the case is expected to be released by the end of next week. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
High performance at a low cost is an attractive combination for any product. That formula has helped Korea's homegrown FA-50 fighter jets find a number of homes in the international market in recent years, and it's expected to find even more as the year passes. Shin Se-min reports.
Its original purpose was to serve as Korea's own light combat aircraft, but it's finding a home in the international market. The FA-50 is a light attack variant of the T-50 Golden Eagle supersonic advanced jet trainer operated by the South Korean Air Force. Co-developed by Korea Aerospace Industries and U.S. defense firm Lockheed Martin, the FA-50 is capable of combat action with advanced radar and missile capabilities. The FA-50 was initially designed to replace the nation's aging fighter jets, while the T-50 supersonic trainer jets were aimed for the international market. However, the T-50's price tag of over $22 million was a bit too high for many buyers, and it didn't sell as well as anticipated. But the remodeled FA-50 has filled its place. Capable of carrying 4,500 kilograms of weapons, the jet is in the same class as others made in Sweden, Italy, and Russia. But Korea's FA-50 is becoming more attractive because of its high performance in relation to cost. Korea Aerospace Industries signed a contract to deliver 12 fighter jets in the Philippines worth of $420 million in March. It follows similar deals to Iraq last year and Indonesia in 2011. Sights have now been set on Peru, Botswana, and the United Arab Emirates and the U.S., which may be looking to replace its aging Air Force T-38s. Korea Aerospace Industries and Lockheed Martin signed a memorandum of understanding on expanding defense cooperation in February of last year. Industry experts expect a deal on FA-50 exports with the U.S. Air Force sometime in 2017. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Shifting to a different topic now, the Korean government has unveiled measures to boost the nation's sluggish youth employment. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Here, students can develop specialized skills that are in high demand in the robot industry. Paek Sung-jun, who's in his first year of the so-called Meister School or vocational school, aims to get a job right after graduation.
I think I can easily adapt to the business atmosphere and learn a lot about the industry.
There are around 40 vocational schools in Korea, but the curriculum is slightly different from the European-style apprenticeship program where students learn and train while they work. So now the government aims to develop an apprenticeship program like that of Germany or Switzerland in these schools so students can receive direct training from companies more frequently. The plan starts next year at 3 trial schools, and companies participating in the programs will receive tax breaks. Those were part of the government's measures laid out on Tuesday to tackle the nation's slumping youth employment rate.
The weak youth employment rate means young people are losing the opportunity to raise their labor competitiveness by working. It is also a factor that could erode the nation's growth potential.
The measures are meant to address the flagging youth employment rate, which stood at 39.7% last year, far below the OECD average of 50%. The problem is that the nation's small and medium-sized businesses are also struggling with a labor shortage. With the nation's high college entrance rate, most young people want to work for large companies like Samsung and Hyundai.
Government measures should focus on improving working conditions of small and medium-sized businesses and raising awareness of SMEs among the younger generation.
Through these measures, the government expects to create 500,000 jobs by 2017. Progress will be reviewed during a weekly economy-related ministers' meeting. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Moving on to the crisis in Ukraine, that country's acting president has urged the United Nations to send peacekeeping troops as pro-Russian gunmen kept up the rampage of storming and occupying local government offices, police stations, and a small airport. Connie Lee has more.
The unrest continues in eastern Ukraine. The deadline for pro-Russian protesters to leave Ukraine came and went with no withdrawal. Instead, the protesters took control of yet another government building on Monday, this time a police station in Horlivka.
If they don't give us a chance to hold a referendum, we'll force them to give us a referendum, because it is the utmost form of democracy. That's it.
At least 10 cities or towns in eastern Ukraine are occupied, prompting the EU and the US to threaten greater sanctions, including trade sanctions on Russia over its actions. The White House said it had urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to tell his pro-Moscow protesters to leave the occupied buildings in eastern Ukraine. Putin denies any interference in the region, but the West isn't buying it.
There can't really be any real doubt that this is something that has been planned and brought about by Russia. The forces involved are well-armed, well-trained, well-equipped, well-coordinated.
As fears of an all-out civil war increase in Kiev, leaders from the EU, US, Russia, and Ukraine were set to hold talks in Geneva on Thursday in hopes to finding a diplomatic solution. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Well, it was a rather cool day here in the nation's capital, but that's not what I'm hearing about those in the southern regions as it got pretty hot there. So let's go over to our Michelle Park for more details. Michelle, so what is going on?
Good evening, guys. Today should have been a much warmer day had it not been for the fog and clouds that stretched across the nation.
Well, I guess this is actually normal weather for spring here in Seoul. When can we expect the sky to clear up, though?
Well, we can expect a warmer day tomorrow here in the capital, but don't expect clear skies as more clouds and heavy fog are in the forecast, along with some increasing levels of fine dust in the air. Now, meanwhile, the southern regions will continue to experience up to 27 degrees of the temperatures. Now, however, we're expecting some nationwide rain on Thursday, which will cool things down a bit. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul starts off the morning at 11 degrees and gets up to 22 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will get up to 27 and 23 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks at 19 degrees, Dokdo at 17, while Mount Gunggang tops out at 15. Now, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening.
And a great start of the day to those of you in other parts of the world.
This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. We hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.